Unlikely Allies, Madison M. Scott, and the LDS-RLDS Battle Over Polygamy, by Mary and Clements, Journal of Mormon Polygamy Vol. 1, No. 1, 2025. Among 19th-century affidavits collected by leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints testifying of founder Joseph Smith's involvement with polygamy is a copy of a letter written by William Clayton to an individual named Madison M. Scott. In this letter dated November 11th, 1871, William Clayton testifies of being scribe to Joseph Smith's July 12, 1843 revelation on plural marriage. The account given in this letter subsequently formed the basis for an affidavit sworn by William Clayton in 1874. Although Clayton's 1871 letter is occasionally cited, little has been published about Madison M. Scott or the context of his request to Clayton. This paper provides biographical information for Madison M. Scott, revealing the motive behind his requests to Utah-based church leaders for testimony of the 1843 Nauvoo polygamy revelation. I also place these written exchanges within the larger 19th century battle engaged by leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and their Midwestern cousins, the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, over public memory of Joseph Smith and polygamy. Use of Clayton's 1871 letter by historians and others. A portion of the letter from William Clayton to Madison M. Scott was published by the Salt Lake Herald on February 13, 1885. In a letter to the editor, Melando Pratt takes issue with the newspaper for stating that Thomas Bullock was the scribe for the 1843 polygamy revelation. Pratt talked to Clayton about his role in writing the polygamy revelation a year or so before his death. Pratt saw Clayton's 1871 letter at that time and copied a portion of it for his own records. He subsequently quotes Clayton's testimony to Madison M. Scott in his letter to the Herald editor. Historian George D. Smith uses Clayton's letter to Madison M. Scott to provide additional details of the transmission of the 1843 polygamy revelation in an intimate chronicle, the Journals of William Clayton. He quotes a large portion of the letter in a footnote tied to Clayton's journal entry for July 12, 1843. George D. simply refers to this as a later statement from Clayton. In a subsequent journal article, he describes the same quotation from Clayton's letter as an amplified version of his journal entry 30 years after the fact. In their article, LDS Joseph versus RLDS Joseph, The Battle to Control the Public Memory of Joseph Smith, historians Don Bradley and Brian C. Hales list Clayton's 1871 letter in a table describing unbound affidavits on polygamy at the Church History Library. They use a quote from the letter in a footnote to expand the discussion of Joseph F. Smith collecting polygamy affidavits in response to the Utah mission of Joseph Smith's sons, Alexander Hale Smith and David Hiram Smith. In the quote, Clayton expresses frustration with the sons of the prophet, who deny bitterly that their father ever had a revelation on the subject. In none of these cases, however, do the authors reveal any additional details about Madison M. Scott, the recipient of Clayton's letter, or why Clayton provides Madison with such a detailed reminiscence of the 1843 polygamy revelation. Madison M. Scott, Scottsville, and the Old Mt. Eden Church. Madison Monroe Scott was born on January 8, 1841, in Scottsville, Floyd County, Indiana. Madison was by occupation a teacher and country merchant. At the time of writing his letter to William Clayton, the 30-year-old also served as a local justice of the peace. Scottsville itself was a small village consisting of a blacksmith shop and repair shop, a store, and a few dwellings. The settlement was named after brothers John Scott, Madison's paternal grandfather, and Moses Scott. John Scott and his wife, Anna Reeser, were Kentucky natives and had 12 children. The family was known for their religiosity, and they were closely associated with the ancient hewed log Mt. Eden Church. By the late 1830s, Mt. Eden was a Campbellite stronghold. Madison's wife, Harriet E. Goss, recalled as a young girl attending the old empty Eden church, where two of John Scott's sons occupied the pulpit, while the father, then an old man, had a front seat. Tensions heightened when several of Madison's uncles became swayed by Latter-day Saint teachings. A breaking point occurred in 1866 when those who remained committed to the teachings of Alexander Campbell opted to separate from MT Eden and build their own chapel. Madison's wife, Harriet, and her father, Frederick Goss, were among those who helped organize the new congregation. They built a wood frame church on what became known as Chapel Hill. It is likely Madison M. Scott attended the Chapel Hill Church with his wife and in-laws. RLDS missionary activity and founding the MT Eden branch, Elijah Banta was the first to expound the message of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to the residents of Scottsville, preaching twice in that area in 1865. The following year, in December 1866, Banta enlisted the help of Apostle William W. Blair to defend RLDS teachings in Floyd County. W. Blair recalled that the opposing camp of Campbellites, Methodists, and Adventists had enlisted the help of a Reverend Henry, a theological champion from nearby New Albany. Blair and Banta preached at MT Eden on the evening of December 14th, while Henry observed from the audience. The following day, the church was packed with an eager and excited congregation, among whom were probably no less than a score of ministers. For 2 hours, Reverend Henry used biblical teachings to argue Latter-day Saint beliefs heretical. After a short recess, Blair stood and replied for 2 hours, not a soul of the large congregation leaving their seats. Blair was satisfied in his defense against Henry's flimsy, shattered theories, and the RLDS missionaries preached several more times before returning home. Although some in Scottsville were persuaded by RLDS teachings as early as 1866, it took another 4 years before any baptisms occurred and a branch was organized. Blair returned to Scottsville in May 1870 after urgent requests from brothers John A., James G., and David Scott, all paternal uncles to Madison M. Scott. James G. Scott, the former preacher in the old MT Eden Church, was the first to be baptized on May 14, 1870. More baptisms followed, and Blair officially organized the Eden branch near Scottsville on June 5, 1870. The founding 14 members included 4 of Madison's paternal uncles, James G., John A., David and Moses R. Scott, and a paternal aunt, Emily Scott McCutcheon. By the time Blair left towards the end of June, there were 21 members in the Eden branch. James G. Scott was selected presiding elder, and David Scott was a deacon. Blair reported that during his visit to southern Indiana, he was bitterly opposed, especially by sectarian ministers who agreed among themselves long enough to array all their talent and skill to overthrow what they called Mormonism. At MT Eden, Blair held a 3-day discussion with Elder Vardman Scott of the Campbellite Church, another of Madison's uncles. Vardman and other ministers in the area had spent 2 years and over $100 preparing for another standoff with RLDS missionaries. Ultimately, however, Blair reported that Vardman made an utter failure. 6 months later, the Eden branch was visited by another church leader, RLDS 70 Thomas W. Smith. Thomas reported that he baptized 6 new members at Scottsville, making special note of his baptism of Harbert Scott on January 4, 1871. Among those baptized was a brother of Mr. Vardman Scott, the opponent of Brother Blair, and also brother of brothers James, Moses, John, and David Scott, who are earnest and faithful saints. He is recognized as the most intelligent, influential, and capable of the family. 4 months after Thomas Smith's visit, another RLDS 70 passed through Scottsville. Although no report from William H. Kelly was published in the Saints' Herald, branch records indicate he ordained John A. Scott to the office of elder on May 28, 1871. Kelly also likely brought with him two recently published tracts. Polygamy, was it an original tenet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by Alexander H. Smith, and the successor in the prophetic office and presidency of the church? No author given. It was during Kelly's visit that Madison M. Scott finally penned a letter to LDS church leaders in Utah. Madison likely determined that if he obtained testimony that Joseph Smith was the author of Polygamy, he could rebut RLDS teachings and claims of succession. LDS, RLDS battles over Joseph Smith's practice of plural marriage. Alexander H. Smith's 1871 Polygamy tract was the latest volley between LDS and RLDS church leaders over Joseph Smith's involvement in polygamy. Although the reorganized church held from its beginning that polygamy was an evil practice, there was disagreement on its origins. As late as 1867, RLDS apostles acknowledged privately an almost universal opinion among the saints that Joseph was in some way connected with it. In contrast, the sons of Joseph Smith, especially RLDS President Joseph Smith III, fervently denied their father was ever involved in the practice. Upon his ascension to the presidency in 1860, the younger Joseph declared, "I have been told that my father taught such doctrines. I have never believed it and never can believe it." At first, some members of the LDS Church were incredulous that Joseph Smith's sons claimed he never practiced polygamy. After visiting Joseph Smith III at Nauvoo in 1860, Samuel H. B. Smith wrote in disbelief, he didn't believe his father ever taught and practiced that principle. Anyone that knows anything about Mormonism at all knows better than that. When Alexander H. Smith served his first mission to Utah in 1866, newly ordained LDS Apostle Joseph F. Smith afterwards expressed frustration. "Do you suppose an angel would convince him?" He said no human testimony could convince him. After Alexander left Utah, church leaders began assembling details about Joseph Smith's involvement with plural marriage in Nauvoo. When Alexander and his younger brother, David Hiram Smith, were assigned another RLDS mission to Utah in 1869, Joseph F. Smith prepared by looking for written evidence of Joseph Smith's practice of polygamy. He was shocked to learn that there was almost nothing besides the 1843 revelation itself. He began collecting affidavits of those who received personal instruction or commandment from the prophet respecting the subject of celestial marriage. Both Alexander and David remained unconvinced by testimonies of LDS church members in Utah, and each subsequently wrote a pamphlet denouncing polygamy. David's 1870 tract, The Bible versus Polygamy, argues that biblical passages often used by LDS church members to justify polygamy were taken out of context. Alexander's 1871 tract instead uses the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants to argue that polygamy was condemned in modern scripture. It also includes selections from the Nauvoo newspaper Times and seasons up to and after Joseph Smith's death, denying that plural marriage was condoned by church leaders. After reproducing public denunciations of John C. Bennett's 1842 spiritual wifery with associated lists of signatories, Alexander writes, "From the above testimonies, I draw the conclusion that some affidavits lately taken in Salt Lake City are false." Alexander further ridicules claims about the 1843 polygamy revelation. According to their own testimony, he writes, "They only have a copy written from memory, which, it is said, was locked up in someone's desk for 9 long years." He says it is evident that a supposed copy of a revelation has been palmed off upon the people by a designing set of men who have made money and women their only pleasure. Madison M. Scott's correspondence with LDS church leaders. Madison addressed his initial letter to Brigham Young, president of the LDS Church in Utah. Without giving his personal beliefs, he mentions that there are many of the Latter-day Saint faith in his community with some contending that the church at Salt Lake is the true church, but others who say it is not so. He notes the recent visits of W. Blair, Thomas W. Smith, and others who argued that the Utah church was in apostasy for introducing polygamy. Tell them that you did not introduce polygamy, he requests, but that Joe Smith introduced it, or that the revelation was given to him concerning many wives. Madison further asks for information of young Joe Smith's being the successor of his father instead of yourself, arguing that it would be a great favor for those contending for the truth. He discloses that young Joe has a church of nearly 30 members in Scottsville, with RLDS church leader William H. Kelly there to make out their claims and also to disprove Brigham Young's. Madison signs his letter with the honorary title of Esquire, reflecting his current position as Justice of the Peace. Madison's letter was answered by David Mackenzie, Brigham Young's private secretary. Writing under the date of June 8, 1871, Mackenzie explains that the doctrine of celestial marriage, or plurality of wives, was taught and practiced by the prophet Joseph Smith, having been revealed to him at Nauvoo, July 12, 1843. He identifies William Clayton, a resident of this city, as the scribe for that revelation, and says that Clayton testified to this in public times almost without number. Mackenzie continues, some of our elders testified to Alexander and David Smith in the office of Prest. Brigham Young, in my hearing, that they had a plurality of wives given to them by the prophet Joseph Smith, their father in Nauvoo. Several of the women certify the same. He further lays blame for the dispute on Joseph Smith's wife, Emma Smith, saying that she raised her children to believe that the doctrine was neither taught nor practiced by their father, and they were too young at the time of his death to know for themselves. It appears that Madison received the response from President Young's office within a couple of weeks. He then pens another letter, this time to William Clayton himself, on June 23, 1871. Although the second letter is not extant, Clayton's lengthy reply indicates that Madison's requests mirrored the first. Clayton was indignant about RLDS claims that the Utah church was in apostasy, that we have introduced polygamy, asserting his personal belief that Joseph Smith III knew better. Clayton then provides a detailed account of Joseph Smith dictating the revelation on celestial marriage on July 12, 1843, explaining it took 3 hours to write. On that same day, a copy was taken by Bishop Whitney, which copy is now here. He states that Joseph Smith sealed Clayton to his second wife, his first wife being then living, and that Clayton himself sealed a woman to Joseph Smith. I could name 10 or a dozen of his wives who are living now in this territory. He asserts, so that for any man to tell me that Joseph did not teach polygamy, he is losing his time, for I know better. Clayton closes his letter by bearing testimony of plural marriage to Madison. You may rest assured that no man that fights against polygamy will have the privilege of sitting down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. The aftermath. If Madison M. Scott received Clayton's reply, it did not appear to hinder the progress of RLDS missionary work in southern Indiana. Church leaders William H. Kelly, Thomas W. Smith, and W. Blair continued to visit the area, supporting the work of James G. Scott and his brothers in sharing the message of the reorganized church. In 1876, Madison moved his family to New Albany, Floyd County, Indiana. He sold his store in Scottsville and set himself up as a dry goods merchant in the city. It is possible the religious tension in Scottsville was a factor in the removal. One Scott descendant writes, since some of the Scott family belonged to the RLDS branch at Mt. Eden, all other Scots who did not belong could not escape the public scrutiny and outcry against the Mormon Latter-day Saints' faith. At the time of his death in 1892, Madison M. Scott was a member of the Central Christian Church in New Albany. Word apparently got out about Clayton's 1871 letter to Madison M. Scott, and at least one individual expressed interest in obtaining a copy. Clayton likely consulted his letterpress book to create a verbatim transcript for George A. Smith. In his cover letter, dated August 21st, 1872, Clayton apologetically writes, "I did not anticipate that any portion of the letter would find its way to public print, or I should have taken pains to more fully explain one or two points, which may appear obscure." In February 1874, Clayton expanded on his testimony in a separate affidavit drafted by Joseph F. Smith. Conclusion. This article provides context for William Clayton's 1871 letter to Madison M. Scott, a non-Mormon living in Scottsville, Indiana. Madison requested personal testimony from Utah leaders concerning Joseph Smith's practice of polygamy to combat the influence of RLDS missionaries among his family and community. Correspondence between Madison M. Scott and LDS church leaders reveals an unlikely alliance combining against a perceived common enemy. Madison's initial request was likely prompted by RLDS missionaries introducing the most recently published tracts on polygamy and succession. In the anti-polygamy tract, Alexander H. Smith was responding to claims of his father's involvement in plural marriage encountered during his 1869 mission to Utah. Clayton's 1871 letter to Madison M. Scott should be viewed as part of the wider contentious dialogue in the 19th century between the LDS and RLDS churches over the memory of Joseph Smith and polygamy. Appendix A. Madison M. Scott letter to Brigham Young note. A member of the historian's office wrote, May ? 1871 on the back of this letter. Contextual clues support that date. Scottsville Floyd Co. Inda to your honor Brigham Young, it may seem strange, but nevertheless I hope you will please receive this letter with kindness. You perhaps will know that there are many of the saints in this vicinity, or at least many in the Latter-day Saint faith, and recently W. Blair, Smith, and others have come here and have established a church, while many contend for the truth that the church at Salt Lake is the true church. They say that it is not, so that you have gone off in apostasy from the fact, they says, you have introduced polygamy. Well, tell them that you did not introduce polygamy, but that Joe Smith introduced it, or that the revelation was given to him concerning many wives. Now, if you or Bro John Taylor could furnish us with any information concerning this matter together with that of young Joe Smith's being the successor of his father instead of yourself, you would do us a great favor that are contending for the truth a great deal of good, and yourself also, because they are trying to do you great injustice. Now, I hope you will not treat this with silence for the good of the cause. Please to grant our request. Young Joe has a church of nearly 30 members. They have one Kelly, here now on a mission, they say, or try to make out their claims, also to disprove yours. Please to answer by return mail myself, and others have no motive, but simply after the truth. Yours very truly and respectfully, Madison M. Scott Esker. Address, Madison M. Scott, Scottsville, Floyd County, Indiana. Appendix B. David Mackenzie letter to Madison M. Scott, June 8, 1871. Note, David Mackenzie was Brigham Young's personal secretary. Salt Lake City, UT, June 8, 1871. Madison M. Scott, Esker, Scottsville, Floyd Co. IND. Dear Sir, yours to pressed, Brigham Young, without date, has been received, to which I have been instructed to reply. With regard to the doctrine of celestial marriage, or plurality of wives, it was taught and practiced by the prophet Joseph Smith, having been revealed to him at Nauvoo, July 12, 1843. The scribe who wrote it, Mr. William Clayton, is a resident of this city, and has testified to this in public times almost without number. Several of the prophet's wives are now living in this city. Some of our elders testified to Alexander and David Smith in the office of Prest. Brigham Young, in my hearing, that they had a plurality of wives given to them by the prophet Joseph Smith, their father, in Nauvoo. Several of the women certify the same. This very day, a lady, a stranger here, not a member of our church, told me in conversation she knew the Mormons practiced polygamy in Nauvoo, for Emma Smith told her so. Yet this very Emma Smith, the prophet's first wife, has trained her children to believe that the doctrine was neither taught nor practiced by their father, and they were too young at the time of his death to know for themselves. The fact is, she has fought the principle from the first, and because the authorities of the church would not succumb to her, she has hated the doctrine and taught her children to hate it and all who teach it, and she has spared no pains to bring them in antagonism with the authorities whom she represents as the bitter enemies of the truth as taught by the prophet. Hoping this will in some measure answer your interrogatory, I am very respectfully D. Mackenzie SECR Press B. Young. Appendix C. William Clayton Letter to Madison M. Scott, November 11, 1871 Note. This is a handwritten copy William Clayton likely made from his letter book to send to George A. Smith. Although the wording is identical to that in his letter book, capitalization and punctuation differ slightly. Salt Lake City, Nov 11.1871 Madison M. Scott. Dear Sir, your letter of June 23rd last was received by due course of mail, but owing to my being so very closely confined with public duties, which has almost destroyed my health, I have not answered your letter so promptly as is my practice. My health is yet very poor, but I have resigned the office which was bearing so heavy upon me, and am in hopes to regain my usual sound health. Now, in regard to the subject matter of your letter, it appears to me the principal topic is what is commonly called polygamy, but which I prefer to call celestial marriage. As to young Joseph Smith saying that the church here have apostatized, that we have introduced polygamy, denying bitterly that his father ever had a revelation on the subject, that is all mere bosh. I believe he knows better, and I have often felt sorry to learn that the sons of the prophet should spend their time in contending against a pure and holy principle which their father had his blood shed to establish. They will have a heavy atonement to make when they meet their father in the next world. They are in the hands of God, and my respect for their father will not permit me to say much about the wicked course of his sons. Now I say to you, as I am ready to testify to all the world, and on which testimony I am most willing to meet all the latter-day saints and all apostates, in time and through all eternity, I did write the revelation on celestial marriage given through the prophet Joseph Smith on the 12th of July, 1843. When the revelation was written, there was no one present except the prophet Joseph, his brother Hiram, and myself. It was written in the small office upstairs in the rear of the brick store, which stood on the banks of the Mississippi River. It took some 3 hours to write it. Joseph dictated sentence by sentence, and I wrote it as he dictated. After the whole was written, Joseph requested me to read it slowly and carefully, which I did, and he then pronounced it correct. The same night a copy was taken by Bishop Whitney, which copy is now here, and which I know and testify is correct. The original was destroyed by Emma Smith. I again testify that the revelation on polygamy was given through the prophet Joseph on the July 12th, 1843, and that the prophet Joseph both taught and practiced polygamy. I do positively know and bear testimony to the fact. In April 1843, he sealed to me my second wife, my first wife being then living. By my said second wife, I had 2 sons born in Nauvoo. The first one died, the second one is here now, and is married. I had the honor to seal one woman to Joseph under his direction. I could name 10 or a dozen of his wives who are living now in this territory, so that for any man to tell me that Joseph did not teach polygamy, he is losing his time, for I know better that it is not hearsay nor opinion with me, for I positively know of what I speak, and I testify to the truth, and shall be willing to meet all opponents on the subject through all eternity. As to the church here having apostatized, that is all a mere matter of assertion, destitute of truth. Prest Young and his associates are, and have been doing everything they can to carry out the plans and instructions of the prophet Joseph, and so eternity will prove to the condemnation and confusion of all their enemies. Anyone that says to the contrary does not know Joseph, nor the mission the Lord gave him to fulfill. Polygamy is a celestial order, the most sacred and holy that was ever revealed from heaven to man. The revelation of July 12th, 1843 says plainly, "To whomsoever this law is revealed, they must and shall obey the same, or they shall be damned, saith the Lord God." How any man who pretends to believe the Bible can fight against polygamy is a mystery to me. Abraham and Jacob were polygamists. One is called the father of the faithful. Of the other it is said, "In thee and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed," so that there can be no blessings for the human family only through a polygamist. I do not know where I could get a copy of the Revelation, or I would send you one. You may rest assured that no man that fights against polygamy will have the privilege of sitting down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. That I must now close. I could say much on this subject, did time allow. Truly yours, William Clayton, Appendix D. William Clayton Letter to George A. Smith, August 21st, 1872. August 21st, 72. William Clayton to George A. Smith, Salt Lake City. Oct. 21.1872. Press. George A. Smith. Dear brother, accompanying is the copy of the letter I addressed to Mr. Scott last November. The underscoring is precisely as it is in the original. The copy is verbatim. It is needless to say that I did not anticipate that any portion of the letter would find its way to public print, or I should have taken pains to more fully explain one or two points which may appear obscure. Your brother in the gospel, William Clayton,